Welcome to the Heal, Thrive, Dream podcast, where trauma survivors become healthy thrivers. Each month, we'll feature a theme in the trauma recovery and empowerment field. To promote your recovery, healing, and learning how to build dreams, here's your host, Karen Robinson, transformational coach and therapist.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Heal, Thrive, Dream podcast. Today, our guest is Marinda Dennis. Miranda is a survivor of childhood rape, adult rape, narcissistic abuse, and religious abuse. On top of all the abuse that she suffered, she also lost a daughter to suicide. And she has other life struggles, including parenting a child that's on the autism spectrum. Miranda, did I say it right?
Marinda.
I keep changing people's names on this show. I'm really good at that. Miranda. What else about your bio do you want to add? Now I'm thinking, I forgot to say that she has a publishing company. It's called Energy Threads. We also want to hear about that today too. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. I'm an author, I'm an editor, and I am a college professor for a few different colleges. So it's a busy life.
Wow. I do want to highlight that you have a book on Amazon titled Love Lingers Still, a haunted anthology of lost loved ones. How did you get the strength to write that so quickly?
I'm not sure that it was strength. I think it was what I needed to heal. It was just what was needed for my own healing process at that time. And so I pounded and I bled onto the page all of that pain. And it turned into this incredible project with some amazing authors included who also had pain of their own that they wanted to express.
What a wonderful project for people to have that release. What about your daughter's completed suicide are you comfortable with sharing with us today?
Well, let's poke around and find out.
Okay. Well, one, my deepest condolences. It's hard to fathom such a loss. Do you want to tell us a little bit about her mental health history?
She was such a sweet child and a beautiful, bright spirit. And she started having signs of mental health issues when she was 9. She was cutting and hurting herself at 9 years old. I came to find out after taking her to the therapist for the first time and getting her some help that it was because her dad told her that he didn't get along with her because she's too much like her mom. And we were happily married at the time. Quote unquote, happily married. So I think that was the first step down that hard road. And then she lost her dad 2 years later in a car accident that almost took her brother's life as well. And he had finally started listening to me and what I was telling him about his daughter and what he needed to do for her to help rebuild that relationship. So she was just starting to build that up. And then he was gone. And so it hit her really hard because she didn't get that sense of closure and she didn't get that same sense of love that other children have. And then in 2019, I believe, I had to run far and fast. I had a dangerous situation that I had to leave. And that yanked her away from all of her supports. And so again, she had another downward spiral, and it was tough. And we were just coming back from all of that. And finally in June of 2022, when everything was going well, when everything was going right, when we'd had this beautiful day as a family and she had this job that she loved. It was her second year there. She was working at the pool and she'd had the best day ever the day before. She took her own life.
Was there any note or explanation found anywhere?
No, and I've
Yeah.
dug through everything. I've taken her computer in, I've taken her phone in. They're still trying to hack her phone for me so that I can see if there was maybe bullying going on that I didn't know about. We haven't been able to find anything. The only
Okay.
thing that we can even possibly guess is that in April, she lost her best friend in the whole world. My grandmother, her great grandmother, died after a very long and full life. And our best guess is that that was just too much loss.
Yeah. How old was your daughter?
She was 15. She had her whole life ahead of her. She had just gone to tour the college that she wanted to go to for the degree program that she was dreaming of. She had so much going for her. She had a boy she was seeing. She didn't know I was seeing him, but she had a boy she was seeing because I told her she couldn't date till she was 16. So
Yeah.
it just came out of left field for us.
I have no words for your loss, and I don't think I want to talk about it too much more just because it's still so early in your grieving cycle. I don't know if there's something you want to offer other moms or parents out there that have lost a child to suicide, where you might be a couple steps ahead of someone who it just happened to, this past couple of weeks. Any words of encouragement for them, or is it too soon for you?
I would say it's not your fault. I think that is something every parent in this situation needs to hear. It's not your fault. Yeah, you're going to second guess. You're going to look at all the what ifs. And you're going to ask if you could have done something more. But the bottom line is, it is not your fault. Your child made a choice. And while it's not a choice that any of us would have ever wanted them to make, it was still a choice they made without us. And it is not your fault.
That is so powerful. Do you truly believe that to the depth of your soul, your subconscious, unconscious at this point?
No.
Okay. Thank you for being honest.
I gotta keep telling myself that too. It's been 8.5 months. The 8-month mark was the release date of my anthology, and it was also my birthday. And I set the anthology to release on that day because I knew it was going to be a hard day. The 10th of any month is hard for me because of that. So I would also say to these parents, be gentle with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Give yourself that time to grieve. Give yourself that space to grieve.
Yeah. It is not your fault.
It is not. And you're going to have to repeat that a lot because, like I said, 8.5 months in, I still don't believe it, but I'm getting there. I'm getting there.
Yeah. How come, why do you think I asked you if you truly believed it?
Because you probably sensed that I may be saying this, but it doesn't mean that I myself believe it. And I may believe that for other parents, and it's easy to believe it for other parents, but it's really hard to believe it for yourself.
It is. Yeah. It's just, with something so deeply personal, it's hard to be objective about it. Like, this is your personal life and situation. But anybody in a helicopter view looking down would be like, oh my gosh, it's clearly not her mom's fault. Her mom adored her and would do anything for her. So keep practicing the thought. I have a trick. I want the show to be about you, but I do have a little coping trick for people that really want to believe something different for themselves. Because it's easy to say in our head, once or twice, oh, it's not my fault. But to really internalize that, the way to make that happen is practice. So the first thing in the morning when you wake up, looking at a card that says, this is not my fault. What happened to my child is not my fault. It's actually stronger to have affirmations or counters without the word not in it. So something like, I adored my daughter and would have done anything for her. I did the best I could for her. And saying that first thing when you wake up, anytime during the day, as many times as possible, and the last thing you see before you go to sleep at night, you will start to really internalize it. And then one day, and there's no magic number, but it is more than 3 months usually.
Yeah.
And the more stubborn the person, the longer it will take. So my strong, independent women who tend to be really stubborn, it might take you longer, and that's okay, because there's some benefits to being stubborn, right? So don't give up on it. Keep saying it over and over. And then one morning you will wake up knowing, truly believing, I did everything I could. I hope that helps.
It does. It's a good reminder. I do affirmations all the time. I'm a huge fan of the Miracle Morning for writers for me. And that is one of the tips that they have is the affirmations.
Mm-hmm. All right. So what are you up for in discussing the other kinds of traumas that you had?
Again, let's poke around and see where we land.
All right. You can always say, nope, I don't want to talk about that anymore. Okay. So before we aired, you mentioned that when you were raped as an adult, that you were drugged. Can you tell us that story?
Absolutely, I can. This is one that I was actually shamed by my church leader for and told that it was my fault and told that I needed to make it right. And so that was the only thing that held me back from speaking about this to anybody else. I went with my college roommate to this guy's house because I could tell what he wanted. I could tell what he was up to, and I did not trust him alone with her. She was sweet, she was innocent, and she just wanted to go hang out with someone she thought was fun. He gave me a soda, and I drank the soda, and then I couldn't move. I couldn't open my eyes. My roommate thought I was asleep. She left me there. And I remember in my head screaming, no, don't go, don't leave me. I remember wanting so bad to move, to run, and I couldn't. I remember feeling him pick me up, and he took me into his bedroom, and he undressed me, and I remember my body flopping around. I could not move. And he had his way with me. And the next thing I remember is waking up on his bed without a single thing on me, not even a sheet. And it was very cold. It was winter outside. There was a draft coming in from the window. It was so cold and so scary.
Okay. And you made it home okay? How did you get home?
My roommate came back to pick me up in the morning to see if I had woken up and was ready to go home. And I didn't tell her, and I didn't. I immediately took a soak in the bathtub, which of course meant no rape kit, no anything of that nature, and because I felt so dirty.
Mm-hmm. And you probably are aware that this is what most survivors do, is immediately shower or take a bath because it's of that feeling of feeling dirty, unfortunately. And so how did the church get involved, or when did you tell someone at church?
I felt so dirty, and I felt like I needed to be clean, so I went to go and talk to church leadership because that's supposed to help. And I confided in my church leadership what had happened, and they blamed me, told me it was my fault. told me that, I shouldn't have done this or I shouldn't have done that. And, I couldn't do certain activities now because of this. So you know, instead of somebody being there to support me, they chastised me for it.
I'm having a hard time understanding where you were drugged. How did they explain that being drugged is your fault? They didn't explain it. They just thought you shouldn't have been in that house, maybe?
Probably. Hard to say, but I wasn't going to leave my roommate to be there alone.
Mm-hmm.
Because I would have felt guilty if anything had happened to her.
And do you feel comfortable saying like the denomination, or do you think that had nothing to do with what happened?
Oh, it had everything to do with what happened.
Okay.
But I would rather not ostracize myself from certain people who are still of that persuasion.
Okay. Yeah, I think the audience could probably guess anyway, because there are certain religions who believe that we'll blame the victim rather easily. And then there's other denominations that wouldn't jump to that, I think. Although all denominations have a sordid past in some way, I would say, in regards to abuse and blaming survivors. But of course, I believe that should not have happened to you. And I'm sorry that it did. Are you still a member of your church?
No, I was for a very long time, including all the way through my marriage. And when my ex-husband said to my daughter, I don't get along with you because you're too much like your mom, I left both.
Okay.
That was enough for me. I was done.
Did you marry into that religion? Or did you grow up in it as well?
I grew up for the first 5 years in it, and my mom was in a really bad relationship in that religion as well. And when she got divorced, she left the church, and then I found it again when I was older on my own and left it for very similar situations as my mom.
Okay. And before we talk about narcissistic abuse further, what are you comfortable with sharing in terms of the childhood rape? And we don't really want a lot of details just because of triggering other listeners, but what would make sense to share about that?
I think the one thing that would make sense to share is that it was a 9-year-old boy, his 8-year-old brother, and their 7-year-old sister. And I was only 9 years old. It doesn't have to be an adult every time. And what I came to realize later about that situation was that somebody had to have done something to those children for them to be that way.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so I'm assuming objects were used because they were actually 2 objects, or oral because they were so young. Is that?
Nope, they could get it up.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow, I'm so sorry. 9. Okay. Like, I have to agree with you. They must have been through a lot of abuse because it's not a normal child activity.
It's not. And my form of healing for that was I wrote a short story entitled The Evil Deed. And my first teacher I showed it to dismissed it, said that's just not believable. My second teacher sent it to the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards competition, and it won their top honor that year, which is the American Voices Award.
Wow, so pretty early in your life, you saw the healing power of writing.
Yeah, very early. I've been writing for a very long time.
That's pretty incredible. Did that experience have anything to do with you having your own publishing company?
I think it was one of the first steps to that. My first publication came when I was 16. I graduated shortly thereafter at 17. I went on to become an English major because I wanted to be what my high school English teacher was for me. And anyone who knows Mrs. Daisy Malcolm, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about because she was so stern and she never smiled. But you could always tell when she was proud of you, even without that. And she was incredible. And I wanted to be that for somebody because she inspired me every day to keep going.
Oh, that's so lovely. Yeah. Okay, so I want to switch tracks just a little bit because I think many of our listeners may not be aware that they themselves are in cycles of narcissism, being abused by a narcissist. And so I wanted to know what, for people who don't understand what that is, could you talk a little bit more about that and maybe give your own definition of that?
Now, this is one that can sometimes be hard to wrap your head around because there are anywhere from, depending on where you do your research, 6 to 9 different types of narcissists. A narcissist is somebody who loves themselves, cannot love anybody else, and they want to possess you. That is their objective, and they will find any way they can to possess you. There is something about you that shines so bright and is so beautiful and is so pure that they want to squash it. And that's what narcissistic abuse does. Not so much what it is, it's what it does. A narcissist will love bomb you. They will give you all this attention, and it gives you these really great feelings like, oh my gosh, somebody cares for me. And then they'll say something, and it might be little, that kind of makes you stop and go, wait, what? And it makes you think you've done something wrong. And so all of a sudden you're trying to backtrack to figure out how to fix it. And it gives you these, originally the hormone was just referred to as fight or flight. They now have fight, flight, freeze, and for those in a narcissistic abusive relationship, fawn, where you will fawn all over the individual to try and get back up to that happy high. And the research I have done actually shows that you can become addicted to this cycle because it is a chemical in your brain. And just like any other chemical dependence of any sort, you can become so reliant on it that you're waiting for that next quote unquote hit of love bomb to off-centered to love bomb to off-centered, back and forth.
Oh, I'm glad I asked you because you clearly knew how to answer the question.
I may or may not have researched this a lot when I got out of my last abusive relationship.
Yeah. I think that was really helpful. So thank you for sharing that, for sure. All right. So I know that you like to write. And so one of my favorite questions to ask my guests on my show are, and I want to limit it because if you're anything like me, you probably have a lot of resources. I like to ask, other than your own book, what books have been helpful on your healing journey?
Wow, there's so many. The ones that I've dove into recently, The Alchemist, the really good one. Any of the books by that same author, and his name escapes me right now, but he's got others that are also so very, very profound. I have the Cat Adams.
Remember either. Sorry, I can't remember either. It's driving me nuts.
We'll figure it out later. I've got
Cat Adams.
Blood Singer series because she is very kick butt and very much take charge, and there is so much that happens to her constantly. And it is one of those, how much can happen to one person kind of books. And how many times can she actually recoup from that?
Are they fiction or
it's fiction? It is a
nonfiction.
It's a fiction urban fantasy.
Okay.
Lots
And
and
the
lots of
author is
action.
What's her name? Cat what?
Cat Adams.
Cat Adams. Okay. Well, that's a series I have not heard of, so I'm gonna have to check that out. And you can recommend one more if something's on the tip of your mind that you've enjoyed or you recommend.
Honestly, I think the only other thing that I would really recommend for anyone in my situation is Aftermath. It's a nonfiction. I can't remember the title of or the name of the author, but it's like a daily devotional, but instead of scriptures, it's these facts about suicide and how to cope with suicide. And some of it's disheartening to learn, and some of it's empowering to learn. But I've found that each piece, no matter which side it is, has been a key part of my journey.
Okay. And you think the title is just Aftermath? There's nothing else up?
Oh,
Ugh.
there's definitely stuff after that. I just
Do you remember
can't
the
remember.
author?
I can look because I have two screens because I love having two screens.
I have two screens too. It makes life so much easier. Because
It
I think
does.
there's Aftermath books about trauma recovery too. So that's why I wanted to make sure I got the right one in the show
I've got it
notes.
right here. It's a Gary Rowe, Roe, Aftermath, Picking Up the Pieces After Suicide.
And does he have a series of grief books?
He
Okay,
does. It's
yes.
part of the Good Grief series.
Okay, I love his work. Yes. I have a workbook that I use too for grief that actually another mother, she's also a therapist who lost her son to suicide. She had told me about his work, and I used his grief books with all of my clients that are grieving. And I have several, believe it or not. Imagine people grieving going to therapy. So, okay,
It's
so
a good
thank you for,
place to be.
yes, it is. So tell us more about your healing journey, because I know it's been off and on through the years. So maybe just share like what has been the most helpful tools or techniques or experiences that's helped your recovery other than the writing.
Other than the writing, I would have
Mhm.
to say being able to connect with people who have been through similar situations. That is one of the few benefits of social media. I'm not fond of social media because of some of the other stuff that can happen, drama and, fighting on social media over any topic, pick a topic. But you can also find these great support groups who are there for each other, who are helping each other, who are providing resources to each other. It's just this tight-knit community that you can find. And when you find the right one, it's like finding home.
I agreed. Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. I have a virtual trauma recovery group that I run. It's a monthly membership where there's courses, but there's a big, huge support element to it. So I can't agree more that, the beautiful thing about support groups is you've got this collective brain power. It's where you can learn from everybody else. So there's usually lots of good resources and stuff from that. Okay. Is there another coping skill or something you recommend?
Exercise is pretty good because it
Mm-hmm.
helps with those happy hormones, gets those going, flowing. And if you're really mad, you can really get some of the frustrations out. So it helps. Anger is one of those steps of grief. I think aside from that, don't lose touch with your loved ones. I knew that I was going to be okay when my daughter passed, when my now husband, he was just boyfriend at the time, he took me by the hand, and we didn't know the outcome one way or the other. And he said, no matter what, we'll get through this together. And that was that. I knew no matter what, We would. And so at night, just having conversations with him, sitting with him on the couch, just having that connection to somebody is helpful.
I love him.
I do too. He's amazing.
I'm so glad, finding someone like that is a rare, rare thing. And this isn't the same thing at all, but I knew I was going to marry my husband when we were boyfriend and girlfriend, and my daughter, who's adopted, she was 2 at the time and was having these unexplainable fevers and pain. And so she was in the hospital. We had no idea what was wrong. And he showed up with slippers and toiletries for me, and he just came every day. And we hadn't even been dating that long. And I was like, wow, this guy is a keeper. And we did end up getting married. My daughter was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, like the juvenile kind.
Oh,
Well, she grew out of it. She's
that's
13
great.
now. Yeah, she's 13 now and grew out of it, which is, I heard there's 50% cases they grow out of it. So I have a good ending to that. But I wanted your story about your husband just reminded me of how wonderful my husband is again. So that's all.
That's good.
Yeah. So there's another part of your story I think is helpful for our listeners to hear about, because survivors, not only are we surviving trauma, but whatever else life puts on our plate. And I know that one of the other things on your plate is having a son on the spectrum. Could you tell us a little bit about the struggles with that and even some of the joys too?
Well, we'll start with the struggles. I
Mhm.
recall when I first suspected he was on the spectrum, he was about a year and a half old and he wasn't walking yet. He would do this weird little crawl thing where he had one foot on the ground and a knee on the ground, and he'd use his hands. And so he'd put his hands down, he'd put his foot down, and then he'd pull his knee behind, and he'd just do this little scoot all the way across the floor. He did that for the longest time. He just would not walk. And then at about 2 months before his second birthday, he lost all language, just completely gone. Would not speak, would not talk, would not anything. It was just gone. And then he had a seizure, and it scared me. I had no vehicle to get him anywhere. I was home alone with my daughter. Their dad was off for his military weekend because he was in the reserves, and it was absolutely terrifying. And we were in a new area, and I had absolutely no support system. And here I was with this child who was turning blue and shaking and convulsing. And, after they got him to the hospital and they did all the scans, he was fine. No seizures since. And then when he turned about 4, he started having these anger episodes where he would just scream, like a guttural scream, like a wild animal. And if it got bad enough, he would bang his head on the wall. There were times where he would strip down butt naked and bang his head against the wall while screaming. And as a parent, it was terrifying. I had no idea what to do. I had never seen this before. I had never run across this before. I work in education and I worked in the K-12 system and I saw some severe cases, but I had not seen this. So we took him in, we got him tested. They said he's a level 2 on the spectrum out of 3. And I worked with him, and I worked with him, and I worked with him. And today, he is doing so good that he got top 10 in his language arts mid-year testing.
Ooh, wow.
Yes! Anyone who has an autistic student, that is the subject for any of them. And here he is, top 10. His therapist said, from what I've seen, I don't know what you're doing, but keep doing it because it's working. She said he was a level 2. He shouldn't be where he is right now based on the testing he had. So what I did was I worked with him, and I had expectations for him, and I did not let up just because he's on the spectrum. If anything, I had a little bit more rigidity for him because he needed it. He knew that that was his safe point, was, okay, I can't cross this line. This is my box, and I can't step out of this box for this instance. And so that helped him to progress, because they're very literal minded. And if you can have those literal boundaries, and don't get me wrong, they will try everything to circumvent those boundaries and to get around underneath.
That's just being clever.
Oh, yes. And he is extremely clever. But if you have those set boundaries and you don't let up, as frustrating as it is at times, and it is frustrating, progress is made.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think that's a beautiful example of how you are a kick-ass mom.
Thanks. Honestly, I didn't even know if he was going to make it, because he was in the car with his dad, and he was hospitalized for 4 months because his injuries were so bad.
Oh, we just added another trauma to your list.
Yeah, there's been a lot of trauma.
Wow. So he had pretty profound injuries to be hospitalized for 4 months.
2 months in the PICU, he was intubated 3 separate times. He came home in a wheelchair with a trach. Like this kid is the $2 million boy. He's a miracle in so many ways.
How old is he now?
He is 12.
Oh, beautiful. Well, I am so happy that it sounds like he's thriving. Would you agree with that word? Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. Okay, so I know I've been all over the place with my questions, so it'll take a trooper to really follow along, I'm sure. So my next thing that I kind of want to wrap up on is, where you are a trauma survivor and a publisher, do you think at this point, or have you noticed gravitating to other survivors to help them publish?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The piece that was just put out, Love Lingers Still, it's about surviving your grief. And there were so many different beautiful contributions for that. And now there's going to be more that come out that won't be all about trauma and all about survival. Some of it will just be testaments of the human soul, like the anthology I'm hoping to produce later this year, Artisans of the Soul, and a teacher appreciation anthology. But absolutely, my work has turned more toward trauma and trauma related. I have a novel that will be coming out in the next couple of years that is all about surviving a narcissistic abusive relationship. There are hints in there all the way through about how to get out, how to, alleviate yourself of this situation.
When that is published, please let us know so we can add it to the show notes. Because as you know, podcast episodes live infinity. And so anybody in our future listening to this can, go to Amazon and get that book. I think that will be a really helpful read for people.
Absolutely.
What else is different about your publishing agency? Why should someone pick you versus another publisher? What makes you special other than the trauma stuff? Or maybe it is the trauma stuff.
Well, my brand is specifically love, loyalty, and healing. Every book that I put out, I want to make sure has that message in it. I want it to be either a message of love, self-love, love of family, something with love. Healing, whether it's healing from trauma, healing from grief, healing from medical conditions, and loyalty to yourself, loyalty to your family. This is a huge theme for me. And this actually came from a piece of art I found in my daughter's room. If you go to my webpage, the artwork that you see, the wings and the heart, are her creation. And I was able to commission an artist to add the crown because we're Irish and we're very proud of our Irish heritage. And if you look, it's a clawdaw without the hands. Instead of the hands, it's wings. So instead of love, loyalty, and friendship, it's love, loyalty, and healing.
No, that sounds amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah. So you gave your inspirational bit at the beginning about not blaming yourself and with the affirmation, it's not your fault. What else could you offer? Any final words of wisdom for anyone listening today, struggling with any kind of trauma at all? What would be another piece of advice or suggestion for them?
Be gentle with yourself. It takes time to heal. And if you're not gentle with yourself and the way you speak to yourself, then you're just reopening the wound. So make sure that when you talk, you have words of self-love and self-empowerment.
It has been a huge honor for us to have you today on our show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I really appreciate your time and letting me talk.
Thank you for listening in today. Please join us next week, same day and time. Also, I would love for you to check out my website, healthrivedream.com.